Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone, to a joint hearing of the House Committee on Commerce and Education and the House Committee on Economic Development. What am I saying? It's Friday. House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development and the House General and Housing Committee. And it is still Friday, the 30th of the month of January. This is a joint hearing on H775, which is really an act that focuses on rural housing production financing. What we're going to do today is have a walkthrough by council of the bill, which is really important for both committees. And then the housing committee, General and Housing Committee, has possession of the bill. However, we have agreed that the expertise of the Commerce and Economic Development Committee is really important for this bill. And so we're going to do kind of what we did last year with the housing bill that became law. And that is that the Commerce Committee is going to just take some of the portion of this bill and work on it. And then we're going to take your language, put it in, and move it forward from there. There is a bit of a timing issue in that this bill, like so many housing bills, touches on a lot of subject matters which are in the purview of other committees. And so it's going to go at least to Ways and Means. It might go to Appropriations. I'm just not sure all stops. I haven't really thought that through, but whatever. It means that we have to get this thing moving out of policy committee so it can get its way. So there is a certain amount of rush on this to move on. Do you have any comments you'd like to make?
I don't at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that said, our first witnesses are Cameron Wood, Legislative Counsel, and John Gray, Legislative Counsel. Gentlemen, do you want to come together?
We are. Yes, they're going to do it.
Thank you. And I think I will just repeat the behavior that I cannot stop, which is that members are free to ask questions whenever they want.
Good afternoon. For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. Gray, Legislative Counsel. I'll do a walkthrough of 775, which both of us have had the pleasure of drafting provisions.
And I believe everyone has a hard copy in front of them. Is that true? Do everybody have their hard copy?
I don't.
I have an e-copy, which is fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay.
Actually, I'm not, but
It happens. We're going to jump right in, H775, and act related to creating tools for housing production. As I mentioned, both John and I drafted different sections of the bill, so we'll walk through each of us kind of commenting on the sections, but feel free to jump in if you have questions as we go through. Section 1 is titled Rural Housing Finance Pilot Program. And what this would do is it's going to create a pilot program within the Department of Housing and Community Development. And as you can see here in A1, it is for the purpose of developing affordable housing among affordable housing in rural Vermont communities. Under the program, THCD may authorize tax stabilization for up to 300 housing units in eligible communities over a maximum application period of 3 years. So there's a few key pieces or key phrases within that section that you all need to be aware of that have definitions, particular affordable housing application period. So here, further on in this section, we'll get into what are the criteria where these houses can go. But as I mentioned, a few key pieces, affordable housing, which utilizes current definitions in statute elsewhere. And then the application period here is 3 years. So it would be from the point DHCD begins accepting applications for a 3-year period, or if DHCD closes the application period sooner than that. The next two subdivisions, subdivision 2 and 3, are really about administration of the program. So DHCD, I guess I should pause, if I need to zoom in here a little bit, if that's more helpful. Apologies there. Does that work for everybody? Is that good? Okay. DHCD shall work in collaboration with VHFA, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, the Office of the State Treasurer, and the Treasurer's Local Investment Advisory Committee in carrying out the provisions of this pilot program. And I'll talk about the Local Investment Advisory Committee when we get to another section later on in the bill. That is a committee that currently exists that advises the state treasurer on investments across the state. So those entities, they work in collaboration with DHCD, and the department may enter into an agreement with one or more of those partners to carry out specific provisions of the program.
I just want to comment that this is a little unusual to do it this way, to list all these agencies and then say they can work together. Partly it's because we don't know yet exactly how to do this in the smoothest possible way. And the whole idea of this is to make it easy. We're talking about people who are developing 5 units of housing. These people don't have their pro forma, their spreadsheet does not have the tolerance for enormous complexity. That's the whole point. So you'll see that I think there are areas that may need further work, either legislatively or maybe not, maybe administratively in this. Like who does what?
Okay. Moving to the top of page 3 and the subdivision 3 here, it's just requiring that those entities have to provide technical and administrative support to the Department of Housing for administration of the program. Okay, moving into subdivision B here on line 5. DHCD shall administer, and pursuant to the Vermont Administrative Procedures Act for EVSA Chapter 25, the commissioner shall adopt any rules necessary for implementation, administration, and enforcement. Moving into subsection 3, here's where we have the application process and the kind of criteria for where these housing developments or housing units can go, and what are the requirements that have to be met. So the application is DHCD creates a simple application process for municipalities to participate in the program that requires the sponsoring municipality to demonstrate compliance with the requirements of this subsection. Location, so the housing development has to be located in a sponsoring municipality with a population of fewer than 5,000 persons. One thing to clarify for you all, or for you all to be aware, it's not specifying at what point that population number is met or looked at. So is DHCD looking at a population of 5,000 or fewer at the time that applications are made available to the public? Is it an ongoing, municipality can go from above 5,000 to below and subsequently submit an application, et cetera. So that may be something that you want to explore. The housing development shall not be located within a TIP district or within a housing development site.
What about a CHIP district?
Yeah, so housing development site is the technical term
For the
for CHIP.
Okay.
So TIP district or housing development site, those are both of the geographic areas you would want to capture. The alternative way to say this is it's not going to be the place in which tax income financing is occurring. So, but this is a location-based criteria. It's not going to be in the TIP district and will not be in the housing development site, which is the parcel or parcels on which a housing development is being developed pursuant to CHIP.
But are we looking at a housing development site to build build something?
Just a technical term, housing development site, literally the term, defined term that we use for CHIP. So this could be anywhere in the state that meets these population conditions, so areas of a particular population, but it can't be in an area that is financed, by tax credit financing, so. Was that it?
A municipality, then say an incorporated village under 5,000 within a town over 5,000 would still be eligible.
Yeah, I would say it would.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, municipality is defined as a city, town, or incorporated village, so if it's an incorporated village that has less than 5,000 people within a larger municipality of greater than 5,000, I don't see any language, I don't see anything in the language as written that would preclude that. Thank you.
Interesting. That's an interesting issue.
Yeah.
The intention here, that maybe we have to think about that. This is not fully baked.
Yeah.
The intention, which is good. The intention here is to focus on entities that are smaller from a governmental perspective, that really don't have the capacity to work their way through CHIP. So I would think that it's good with a village.
Yeah.
That's a small village in an incorporated town.
There's still confusion on the housing development site piece, or are you just thinking through?
We appreciate the legal language. We would prefer it's clear not only to the lawyers, and perhaps your suggestion of any TIF.
The housing development site is a defined term in this, we just haven't gotten to the definition
Yeah,
section.
but when we read one, then we look at two, and we're talking about a proposed housing development. Up above, we're saying you can't do a housing, so I know what you mean, but it contradicting itself.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So maybe there's different language that you can use, identifying that you can't use TIF or CHIP or something.
Okay, sure.
And when we look at location within a municipality, are we looking at the tiers again, or can be anywhere, but they're gonna have to go through permitting? They may have to go through the full permitting process of Act 250.
This doesn't disrupt anything related to the Act 250 process.
Yeah, it's anywhere.
But if they were in a tier 1 or tier 1A, then they wouldn't have to go through the process, right?
I don't know that about that 250.
Yeah, defer those types of questions to another attorney.
Yes.
But I would agree with John, there's nothing in here that would disturb the current, processes in place regarding Act 250 and exemptions, et cetera, so.
I think this is very deliberately stepping outside of the tier process. So whatever the tier process requires sits there, and then this is an addition. So to be specific, if it's in tier 1B and somebody's opted, if a town is opted in, they'd be exempt. If it's in tier 1A, they'd be exempt. But equally important, if it's in tier 2, which is a lot of the state, they can do it. In fact, it's my hope that we would get applications from towns in tier 2.
And just to return to your earlier, I think a simple fix for the housing development, we could just say for a CHIP site and then define CHIP site to meaning what housing development site means under. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I get that. It could be in tier 2, but if it's project, I think there's a cap on 16 housing units. So if it's above 9, it would still be an Act 250 going on.
Yeah, if it's in tier 1A or 1B where they've opted in and it's 9 units, it's in tier 1A or tier 1B that's opted in, it's exempt.
Right.
If it's tier not in and it's less than 10 units, then it's exempt also.
Right. I'm just concerned about the 10 to 16 count.
They would be covered. They would be subject to Act 250.
Right.
Okay. I'm gonna focus everybody back here on the subdivision 2, which is where we left off. As you were just discussing, this is the criteria under subsection C, the application, the municipality has to demonstrate compliance with the subsection. So we talked about location, where the housing development can be, where it can't be, maximum size, proposed housing development must be primarily residential, may include commercial. The residential portion of the proposed housing development shall not exceed 16 housing units. The commercial portion of the proposed housing development shall not exceed 5,000 square feet.
Just a quick question. So how was the 16 unit max arrived at?
I'll defer to the sponsor.
I knew you'd ask that question. It was pretty arbitrary. We wanted it to be a relatively small project. We thought about 10. We thought about 20. And we kind of, some of us, including Tom, Charlton, and myself, just ended up at 16. It's not a magic number. I can't pretend there's more than that.
Great answer.
Well,
Move to the top of page 4, so.
Sorry, primary residence? That's not, is that listed? there?
Primarily residential.
Yes, but it's,
It's not a defined.
which are
we're
you?
not focusing on primary residential housing. This
You
could
mean
be any.
the whole issue of short-term rental?
Just flagging that for.
Yeah,
something.
that's definitely.
Just flag that.
It's not defined, and there's no current restriction.
Okay.
Top of page 4, the last criteria here, which is affordability, states that at least 15% or a minimum of 2 of the proposed housing units shall be affordable housing units. Affordable housing units shall be subject to covenants and restrictions that preserve their affordability for a minimum of 15 years or longer, as provided in municipal bylaws. Okay, we're moving to sub D, starting on line 6. So Department of Housing and Community Development develops a procedure for selecting among the qualifying applications that have met the criteria in subsection C. Taking into consideration both the overall affordability of the proposed housing units and the extent to which tax stabilization facilitates that affordability. Using the selection procedure, DHCD recommends to the Commissioner of Taxes up to 300 housing units for tax stabilization. Then subdivision E is where we really get into what the tax stabilization means, what is it going to look like. Notwithstanding any law to the contrary, sponsoring municipality may contract with the owner of property selected for tax stabilization to fix and maintain, so this is lines 15 and 16, fix and maintain for the duration of 10 years, the valuation of the property in the grand list as follows. From years 1 through 7, the property will be valued at the pre-development value of the property. And moving to the top of page 5, for years 8 through 10, it would follow this in ABC. So for years 8, it would be 25% of the property value change. Or I guess, excuse me, let me back up. The property would be valued at the pre-development value plus an adjustment calculated at, for year 8, 25% of the property value change. Year 9 it would be 50, year 10 it would be 75.
The idea here is at the very beginning of the process, the property is either owned or controlled by the developer. And the whole idea of this is to give the developer, as they develop their own spreadsheet, their pro forma, is to help them by injecting into the pro forma the fact that they don't have to put as either wherever they do, put it above the line, below the line. They don't have to put a line, a big line for change in property taxes. But on the other hand, the reality is that at a certain point when the project stabilizes, that's when it's built and rented out or owned, then you have human beings, not that a developer is a human being. Then you have people who are either tenants or owners. And we didn't want to just have the full tax burden suddenly materialize on them in year 10. And just have everybody like, what? When they get their tax bill. So it goes up.
You can think of the final 3 years as like a transitionary mechanism. The general idea is you're paying on the pre-development value, and then as you move in the final years to the actual fair market value, transitionary mechanism to get you to that.
I'm just wondering, why is it that we require the restrictions of the affordability for 15 years, but the benefit only goes for 10?
So the reason the 15-year figure is there is that in Title 24, there's an existing definition of affordable housing, which uses a 15-year covenant restriction. You may recall that for CHIP and in other places, we've talked about all kinds of different definitions of affordable housing. In CHIP, the duration of the restrictions for primary residency is tied to the length of that debt until it's retired. You don't have the same thing here, so you couldn't use the same duration as CHIP. And basically, I think it was just a choice to use an existing duration, the Title 24 duration. But if you wanted to do something comparable here in conceptual approach, you would say the 10-year benefit, 10-year restriction, right? Like that would be a natural. So there's different ways to do it, but the 15-year duration here is drawn from the Title 24 existing affordable housing definition.
The pre-development value, what date is that set? When permits are applied, or when permits are all approved and it's ready to start with an excavator, or don't we have that date certain?
So the thing that we do have is the valuation of the property as of the most recent annual appraisal date preceding preparation of the property for development. Now, what preparation of the property for development is, that's a general concept. I think, just speaking for myself, some of the thinking in the language here is you're trying to capture that someone might have to do things like demolition, or they might not have to demolish. Maybe it's already ready to go and you're taking next steps. You want a generic enough phrase to capture the steps that someone would take to start converting that property into a housing development right. And so this is the generic phrase that was chosen, but you could play with this line, you could come up with a different fixed date, but the date that's in the draft right now is most recent appraisal, annual appraisal date preceding preparation of the property for development. Which I think is still getting at there's still a looseness concern you're identifying, but trying to get at that issue.
Elizabeth, you had a question?
I just was wondering why you drafters of the bill decided to put a 10-year limit on affordability.
It's actually 15.
Why you decided to put a limit on
It
affordability?
came out of a definition, go ahead.
Yeah, Title 20, that's the existing Title 24 definition that's regularly used for affordable housing. It is true that the Title 24 has is 15 years or longer if, the bylaws of the community provide. I'm not sure if we have. It's the same thing. It's the exact same as the Title 24. So I think the durational component was, I'm not going to say arbitrary, but it was chosen among different factors and settled on one that is commonly used by the legislature.
There is a larger tension here, to be, perfectly clear. There is a tension here, which is, on the one hand, you don't want to see state benefits accrue to projects that are, building $600,000 homes, telling them to people who are immigrating from Massachusetts. On the other hand, you don't want to put a provision in that kills the applications, because 5 and 7 and 10 unit projects can't take it. They just can't do it. Or they can't administer long-term affordability. And the only people who can is like Champlain Housing Trust. And they can't, Champlain Housing Trust or some other entity like that can't deal with 3 or 5 units. So that's a real world tension that I do not claim to that we have perfectly addressed in this draft.
But that's a separate issue from, that's the number of units versus the duration of affordability. And in 15 years, let's say this project got us 1 million new homes. In 15 years, ostensibly, none of them would be affordable anymore. And so we're back at square one with our affordability problem. And I just wondered how you planned through this to address that.
It's the affordability issue versus permanent affordability versus affordability for a duration is a proper subject for discussion by the committee.
I can imagine the answer to this, but I'm curious, it's a limited project, 300 units, 3 years. And I'm wondering what the considerations are for having that number as opposed to something broad.
That it was given approximately the same amount of thought as 16 units. Could be actually, and I don't want to undersell what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's we wanted it to be a pilot project, not a permanent project.
Okay.
So we had to come up with some limitation. It could be smaller. Frankly, it really could. I mean, frankly, there are two advantages of a fixed number of units without saying what the right number is. One is it allows JFO to much more accurately tell us, and we would like to know, what is the maximum cost to the education fund of this project? I have to confess, I'm not in love with the fact that we use education fund to finance housing that way, but that's just the way tax works. Second advantage is it will tell us whether developers actually show up, which is important because in my personal view, it is very difficult to do development outside, because the rents are so low and the purchase price is very often so low, it's hard for people to build. And that's what the pilot project will teach us. So the number is flexible.
It may have been answered, but I just wanted to explain that other elements of the financing stack could be local land trust. There are other places
We'll have to
for
work up to that.
long-term or permanent affordability to be built into the project. So it's not, 15 years isn't a maximum limit. It's a minimum limit.
But there isn't a requirement. But there is not a requirement.
Well, if they need the participation of local land trust to build that financing stack, which generally they do, or they would be there doing it already. That's the place where a local land trust could build in permanent affordability. They have their own criteria, there are other criteria that will be introduced when they do their financing. If they could do it without the participation of grants and other sorts of things, they'd be doing it now.
Abby?
When drafting this, did you consider tying these developments to the homes for all designs that are being developed? Case, those are almost by design for middle income and lower income.
We didn't tie them, no, but later on, when we get to the housing accelerator, Tom can discuss that. I do want to mention, I don't want to slow down questions or anything, but one of our witnesses needs to leave at 2:10? 2:10, so we want to get through the one.
So we talked about the criteria, we talked about the selection process for GHCD, we talked about the tax stabilization itself in subsection E. So for those following along, we're back to page 5. The last few subsections here are just giving GHCD requirements to monitor, annually confirm with Department of Taxes compliance with terms, and then annual reporting requirement for DHCD, submitting a report to House General and Housing, Ways and Means, Senate Economic Development and Finance. You may want to add, additional committees there, but obviously if it comes to one committee, it's available for you all. And then we have definitions. We talked about affordable housing, tying that to the current definitions that are in Title 24 that exist. We talked about the application period being 3 years, beginning from the first day the department is accepting applications. And then we discussed the pre-development value. And then the property value change. I think you're all aware based on our conversation of what those would be. And we, as mentioned, we have the definition of TIF district and housing development site, but we'll clean that up a little bit based on some of the feedback that was provided. So then the next section, section 2, this is 32 VSA 5404. This is the chapter in Title 32, excuse me, the section in Title 32 related to tax stabilization. And so this is adding in the agreements under the Rural Housing Finance Pilot Program established under this act, which can be approved by the Commissioner of Taxes and recommended by the Commissioner of the Department of Housing and Community Development. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah. So this particular section, you may recall this from TIF. This is a huge section. It's incredibly unwieldy and has a bunch of subsections. The first of the subsections relate to tax stabilization agreements. And I just want to point out 2 different kinds of tax stabilization agreements are contemplated by this section. One are tax stabilization agreements, as you see on lines 2 through 4, that affect the education property tax grant list of the municipality. There are also listed in this section tax stabilization agreements that do not affect the grant list of the municipality. Just to draw what the difference between those 2 is, if it affects the grant list of the municipality, it means essentially that the share of liability that would have been borne by that gap in value between pre-development and fair market is shifted across the whole state when the statewide education property tax is administered. That's what you see here. So the tax stabilization agreement that is offered under this pilot program would affect the grant list of the municipality. The other option that's available is one that does not affect the grant list of the municipality, meaning that instead of shifting that liability, which may be relatively small, we don't know, but instead of shifting that liability across the state, it would mean that the municipality itself would need to cover the liability made up in that gap. But this is a policy choice, which section you put it in. What's proposed here is that it affects the education property tax grant list of the municipality, which means instead of the burden being shouldered by the muni, it's shouldered by the state as a whole.
Okay.
You can think about it as it's the liability that's on that gap in value between pre-development and
But there's also a municipal tax as well, right? So
That state.
the muni still administers the municipal tax in the way that they do, and that would be shifted to the state. That in effect would need to be raised through the municipality. That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, if you would like, I can jump to the sections that are more tied to the office of the state treasurer, since that is your witness, that is a time constraint. If you want to jump to that, review it quickly on how the state treasurer comment.
I think that would be an excellent idea.
So forgive me for the scrolling, but we're gonna jump all the way down to page 9, section 4. This is in Title 10, section 10. This is where the Vermont State Treasurer, has the authority to establish credit facilities for the purposes of funding specific investments that you all as a legislature have articulated in this section. So here's subsection A currently. This is lines 6 and 7. The state treasurer has the authority to establish a credit facility of up to 10% of the state's average cash balance on terms acceptable to the treasurer. And then under sub B, those funds can provide, and I'm on lines 12 and 13, can provide financing for infrastructure projects in Vermont mobile home parks. That's the sub A and the sub B. The proposal here is to increase that credit facility up to 12.5% of the state's average cash balance, up from 10%. There's just some cleanup here in subsection C, so pardon the scroll. So just comment that there is another credit facility under subsection C that allows for an additional 2.5% of the state's average cash balance to be used to fund climate infrastructure and resilience projects. So that's sub C, there's no change there. There's a reporting requirement in subsection D. In subsection E here, what this is gonna do is it's adding language to say that the state's treasurer may retain interest paid on loans established under those credit facilities. And interest will be transferred to a Vermont Housing Special Fund, which is created in the next section. And then the sub 2 says that the treasurer may use interest paid on those loans to provide capital for housing projects in Vermont, in the state, that in the treasurer just are necessary to promote increased availability of housing, including bulk purchasing of offsite constructed housing, as set forth in sub F. Then we get to the subsection F, and it is the treasurer shall have the authority to create a credit facility of up to 1% of the total funding allocation under sub A of this section to facilitate bulk purchasing of off-site construction housing. And then in the next section here, we have the creation of a special fund. The fund consists of the following: monies appropriated by the General Assembly, federal government, etc. The key thing, though, as was mentioned in the previous section, it's the interest paid on these loans from these credit facilities are going to go into this new special fund. Question that you may want to talk with the state treasurer, because I was not able to hunt down an answer before we spoke here. I'm not sure where that interest goes currently, but this would be changing it to direct it to this special fund in accordance with the subdivisions that we just reviewed. And then the money in that fund, this is kind of standard language we put into the special funds. You know, monies that are going to stay there, you know, can be at the end of the fiscal year remains in use in additional fiscal years, et cetera. And then the treasurer may also use those funds to pay for the administrative costs necessary to support the credit facilities created. And I'm assuming we may need some little cleanup here, so I'm assuming it's the credit facilities created in the previous section. So there's a few amendments we may need to make to clear that up.
Just generally, and then I do appreciate, council, your willingness to change the order, because I think the next thing we'll do is hear from the treasurer. But there's 3 different things going on here. One, remember, the cash fund of the state has to be relatively liquid, as the treasurer will explain, because the money's moving in and out of it all the time. But the treasurer has felt, and we passed legislation that enabled the treasurer to invest 10% of the money at any given point in housing, affordable housing, and has done so. This bill increases that to 12.5%. So that's one. The second is, my impression is at the moment, to be confirmed in testimony, that the interest that is earned on all of these admittedly below market loans, that's the point, goes to the general fund. And this would divert it back into housing. And then the third is, you're going to hear after Mike Piechek's testimony, you're going to hear, as we go back, you're going to hear about another element of this bill, which is a housing accelerator, which essentially promotes the bulk ordering of off-site modular homes. And the problem, and essentially the concern was that if you, to make bulk orders, an entity of the state may have to take a whole bunch of smaller orders, put them together into a bulk order. And the developers will pay for these units. But if you're going to go to a home manufacturer of off-site modular homes and ask them to open up a whole new line to make, 40 new homes, they're going to be concerned about making sure that they're going to be paid. And this language allowing 1%, is it?
The credit facility, 1%.
1% is a credit facility that would allow the treasurer to help backstop to facilitate that. And with that, I guess, Mr. Treasurer, would you come forward? We're trying to deal here with the fact that your time is limited.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me and glad that it's a joint committee, so we get more opportunity to talk to everybody about these ideas. Happy to take any questions that you have, but I thought maybe it'd be helpful if I just provide a little bit of background information on those, particularly those first 2 points.
I think it would be great if you told us who you are, too.
Sure, I'm Mike Pichak, I'm the state. Thanks again for having me. So the 10% in Vermont program, this is something that, as the chair pointed out, has existed in statute for about, at this point, it's actually about 12 years. I think it was some discussions in 2015, first was established. When I came in office in 2023, we took a strong look at this because our cash balance had really grown quite a bit during the pandemic. When this program was first established, the cash balance was sort of in the $200 million, $300 million range, fluctuating throughout the year. Now it's in the $1.5 billion to $1.8 billion range, fluctuating throughout the year. So that 10% number, which is based on those averages, really went up quite a bit. And we took advantage of that, expanding it from, at that time, there were about $15 or $18 million in loans that were outstanding. And we expanded up to $100 million. Now it's up to $120 million. So we're taking a conservative approach still. Basically, we're assuming that the cash balance is 1.2 billion, even though the cash balance today is 1.5 plus billion. So we're still taking a conservative approach, but it's expanded our capacity quite a bit. And we focused on housing as our top priority, as the chair pointed out, and have really tried to focus on providing the value of the below market interest loan at this point in time. Because as costs have risen for building all types of housing, one of the things that I think as a state we're trying to figure out is how do we allow for the housing to happen at a lower cost. And the financing costs are one of the things that was making it prohibitive for a lot of projects to go forward. They had been penciled out prior to or during the pandemic. And then once the pandemic ended, all the costs went up quite a bit. Labor costs went up, materials went up, and financing went up. And they could no longer make it work at the higher financing levels that they were going to have to borrow from. So we ask all the projects that we work with, do you need this money in order to be able to complete your project? And we need them to answer yes to that. It's something we set up as an internal policy. We obviously check that and look at it. And then we also want to make sure that there's a pretty limited risk profile. Whenever you're lending or investing, there's always some risk, but we want it to be as low risk as possible because we need these monies back because they are monies that have been appropriated or will be appropriated by the legislature. So we need them to come back, but we're trying to get a second bite at the apple in the interim. So how we reduce our risk is we obviously look at the quality of the project, but we also try to find an intermediary, or always find an intermediary that will lend from us and then directly to the project. So we basically have two opportunities for repayment there. So the Vermont Housing Finance Agency is a great example. The Vermont Economic Development Authority is another example. Credit unions and community banks have been another example that we've been lending to and through recently as well. So moving the 10% to 12.5% would give us another about $30 million in capacity to do loans and lending in this program. Just to give you a sense of what the impact has been, we've lent out just under $100 million. And that has supported the construction or the preservation of about 1,300 units of homes in Vermont. There are about 30 projects or so across the state that we've invested in. We have another round of investment that we're going to announce on Monday. And again, that's about $30 million or so. And that impacts about 450 units of housing across Vermont. So that announcement that we'll make on Monday is pretty similar to what you could see as an impact here, $30 million. We've been able to find projects, leverage that money, and support about 450 units of housing as a result.
Mike, what are the interest rates kind of that you're at?
Yeah, so it depends on how long the loans are for. If it's a really short loan, like 5 years or less, it's 1%. If it's sort of something more like 10 years, it's 1.5%. If it's 10 to 20, it's 2%. If it's over 20, it's 2.5%. So we just account for the different level of risk that exists based on the duration of the loan. Now, if we put that in our bank account right now, it looks like we're getting paid about 3.8% interest from the bank. But those rates have been coming down and down. And this is a long-term investment. From our perspective, these are projects that wouldn't go forward without this, ability to save money on their financing. And we might be getting 3.8%, but if they went out into the market to get a loan from a commercial bank, it could be 7, 8%. So it's quite a dramatic difference for them to get, a loan that's 2% plus an administrative fee, maybe from Vita or from a bank or credit union that brings it up to 3.5%. It's a big difference for them, and it really makes projects able to go forward that otherwise would not be able to pencil out if they didn't get that reduction in financing costs.
But you're comfortable with going up to 12.5?
Yeah, so and to be clear, as Cameron pointed out, there is another credit facility too. So in total, it would bring it up to 15%. This would be 12.5 under the 10% Vermont program. It would now have to be called 12.5% Vermont if this went through, but, and then the
It's
two.
not as catchy.
Yeah.
Like the Big Ten.
And then the 2.5% for the climate and infrastructure. So that 15%, I would be comfortable. We need liquidity, obviously, to make sure we're paying, the bills that we have that are coming due, that are part of the budget. 15% as sort of a less liquid or a liquid investment. I think that is sort of where I don't know how much higher we want to go than that, but that doesn't give me great pause. Again, it'd be about it'd be about $150 million out of about $1.5 billion cash on hand that we have. So it still gives us quite a bit of flexibility and liquidity in order to make sure we're making those payments that we need to be making.
Do you find that you're sitting in first position with these when lending, or are you with a smaller part of a larger capital stack? And if the latter, have these activities sort of been really highly valued by existing lenders who are finding additional capital to reduce their risk as well?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I can't think of an example where we are only, it's always that we're part of the capital stack. And in the first round, it was often that we were the last one in because costs had risen and, price, and all that sort of thing. In this most recent round, there are a number of projects where we're like the first one in, and that's a different kind of momentum for those development. But I think being sort of toward the beginning or toward the end are pretty impactful places to be because it either closes it out or sort of propels it forward. In terms of your question, though, I mean, of that 100 million or so, I think when we calculated it, there was about an additional 330 million that was leveraged against that 100 million. So that just gives you a sense of the ratio. So that's either, private developer or not-profit developer coming in and bringing that capital. It's a bank leveraging that or credit union leveraging that as well. But that's important for us because it reduces our risk. We don't want to be the only one in on the loan. The other point that you made about what position are we in, when we have an intermediary like a bank or credit union, they, in many cases, want to be first position. That matters to them more than it does to us because if they don't get paid, they still have a requirement to pay us. But that's how we sort of get a double layer of protection.
Mike, are you funding any housing? Are you funding housing as part of other projects? Is this housing that is mostly affordable? What?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why I'm asking. I'm really concerned. This is a Band-Aid and not a root cause fix.
Yeah.
And so as we add more money, right, which we're hearing in other contexts that the money, people are happy to lend it, right? This is the penciling out piece, but are we continuing the problem that we have, or are we focusing on actually fixing the problem that we have? And I'm there are a lot of ways to think about that, but.
Yes. So in terms of one of the good things about this source of funds is that it's really flexible. We don't have requirements that come with certain environmental based grants or climate or weatherization grants or historic credits or low income tax credits or all those things that have different requirements and different strings. This we've always viewed as very flexible. So it can be any kind of housing. It's been primarily affordable housing. We went through the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. That's about 56 million of our amount that we get lent out. That's going toward affordable housing. There's other investments that we're making in affordable housing outside of that as well. But there's also workforce housing and also some market rate housing. Market rate is the minority by a vast amount, but there is still some. And the other piece that we hope to grow, but exists also, is housing for older Vermonters, you know, as that is, I think, an area that should continue to take this from all policymakers, but certainly from this source of funds. So it really is flexible, and it represents sort of the spectrum of housing investment.
So this project that talks about a percentage of the project is housing, but not the entire project is housing, does that fit with the portfolio that you're
Yeah.
right now also?
Yeah, it's a good question. Almost all of the projects are only housing that we're focused on, but not exclusively. There are some projects, just maybe at this point two, that would sort of fall into a sort of economic impact project that has a housing component. And generally what that usually means is there's a hotel and there's also housing. And the hotel and the housing are connected and they sort of go side by side from the financing standpoint. But we view that as both sort of housing, but also recognize that this sort of 10% program was created for general economic activity. So we want to recognize the impact in many communities that a new hotel can have. And actually if a community doesn't have enough hotel rooms, it can actually put pressure on housing through the incentive of local residents putting their home up for Airbnb or their ADU or a home that they own as a short-term rental rather than a long-term rental. So there is a housing component even when investing in a project like a hotel, but those are the minority. The vast majority are only housing.
With respect to the part of the bill that is referring to the interest that you earn, how much does that currently involve, and more or less, how much interest are we talking about?
Range from $1 million to $2 million, sort of what comes from this portfolio that goes.
How does it go to the general fund?
Yeah, exactly right. So that whole 1.5 billion, we're investing it in our bank accounts, we're investing it in treasuries and short-term investments. There are other funds outside of that cash fund that we're investing as well. And all of that sort of collectively then sort of passes through our office into the general fund. So that number prior to the pandemic was like $800,000 of revenue to the general fund, almost nothing. And now it's tens and tens of millions of dollars because the cash balance is so large and interest rates have been so high. But we are seeing both of those things come down a bit, the cash balance down a bit, and then interest rates now starting to fall. We used to be getting 5.25% on our bank account. Monies that were in a bank account, now it's, like I said, I think it's about 3.8%. So those numbers are coming down.
So the 1 to 2 million is the portion of the interest that it's attributable to the loans under the 10% Vermont. And that currently goes to the general fund.
Yeah, exactly right.
Elizabeth.
Thank you. So just so that I don't misspeak about this to my colleagues and to my constituents who are really interested in all of this. And just so that I fully understand, the 10% program, or the would-be 12.5% program, the interest on that goes into the general fund?
Yeah, exactly.
Why? Why would, if this is an investment, if we're taking money out of the ed fund?
No, this isn't taking any money out of it. It's just, it's cash that the state has, that it always has, just operational, moving in and out.
But it is creating, we do all of this creation of housing with monies from the ed fund, do we not?
Not this program.
Separate from.
This is separate from tax increment or taxes. That was prior. This bill has like 5 elements to it. One element you heard earlier is tax stabilization, is taking property tax and eliminating it, and that does take money out of the ed fund. This is a different element, which is the treasurer's program, 10% for Vermont, which simply, as you said, it's 2 bites at the apple. Instead of leaving that 10% in a bank somewhere earning 3.8%, it allows the treasurer to devote it to housing, most of which is affordable or work.
And it's exclusively in the realm of the general fund, this program that we run. That's, the impact is in the general fund, not in the education fund.
Is,
But I guess my question is why we as legislators are so, from where I'm sitting, arbitrary about what we consider property valuation and increasing our tax base and our inputs into the ed fund. But when it comes to other elements of property or housing or the other pieces, we don't bring that back to the ed fund. And I'm just confused about, you're all looking at me like I'm getting signals that I really don't understand. So can you explain again? Because I don't really understand why there are some inputs into the ed fund and there are some outtakes from the ed fund, and they seem arbitrary to me.
this has nothing to do with the ed fund. It's all about
Does it
the
have to do
general
with-
fund.
Does it have to
All
do with
about the
property?
general fund. It has nothing to do with property taxes, nothing to do with the ed fund. It's just that the treasurer has a cash balance that they just have because money flows in and out. You know, we make an appropriation, it's over time. I guess you can speak better to this. It just flows in and out. And the question is, how do we use this 1.2 to 1.5 billion dollars in cash that's just sitting there? And at the moment, the default is to invest it in a bank at 3.8%. And so the 10% for Vermont allows them to take 10% of that floating cash benefit and invest in housing. And I think through a committee, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a local investment advisory committee that is made up of, myself, obviously, a member from the bond bank, a member from Efficiency Vermont, a member from VITA, a member from VSAC, and then a member from the PHFA. So all of us are advising on the applications that we receive and the decisions that we make around investment.
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. My other question is that, are there any limits that you have on, you said you had internal rules on certain things. Do you have other limits on the types of housing that can be, that this funding can be used for?
Yeah, so there's nothing in statute that limits the type of housing. So when we,
But you said you have internal.
yeah, so we have an investment policy that we have for this committee, and it's focused largely on the risk. You know, we want to make sure that we're not too heavily invested in any one project or any one intermediary, so that, all of our eggs aren't in one basket. We also want to make sure that we don't, in our portfolio of loans, that everything isn't 25 years. We want it to be blended, so some things are getting paid back in 5 years, some things are getting paid back in 10 years, some are in 20, and then some are longer, because that gives us flexibility too, because it doesn't mean all of the money is out for 25 years. Some of it's getting paid back sooner, which gives us added liquidity if we need it in 2 years or 5 years or 7 years. The other thing is we do have a prioritization that we talk about, and we do want to have the priority be affordable housing, because there is a subsidy here, but it's not exclusively, affordable housing that we're focused on. It can be other types of housing under the statute, but that is primarily where we end up investing.
Do you have any kind of prioritization for housing that's accessible or includes universal design?
So there is at least one project we've invested in Waterbury that is for individuals with disabilities.
Mhm.
And, there are more opportunities for those kind of investments. We can only invest in what people apply for us for. We would be certainly interested in more investments.
But I guess what I'm asking is, do you have an internal rule about prioritizing the addition of, in an aging state, where we have a 0.04%, my understanding at the last count, available 0.04% available rental units that are accessible. When we talk about adding housing, do you have an internal rule that adds accessible or housing using universal design?
Yeah, so there's no internal policy, but it is just from my own personal perspective, like one of the areas of focus for us is to invest in housing that is for older honors. I mentioned the one that we invested in that was for people with physical disability, which is a specific investment, a specific project. But generally, like we have tried to prioritize and find housing that is for older Vermonters as well. We made an investment into the HGen's grant down in HGen's to help that project go forward. Is 65 units of assisted living. There's another project that we're going to invest in up in Grand Isle that's a senior facility. There's one that we invest in St. Albans, it's a senior facility. So again, we can only invest in what comes to us. And I think.
And I understand,
Yeah.
I understand. I was really asking just simply whether you have an internal rule about that.
Yeah. No, I mean.
I see that you don't, I know that you have, and we've talked about this before,
Yeah.
that you have made those investments. That's not what I'm asking.
Right,
I'm just asking whether you have an internal policy about it.
right. No, we don't, but it is just as a personal matter, as a member that's on that board and as the treasurer, it's a personal priority that we find opportunities to invest in senior housing.
What I'd like to do, since I know you have to go in about 1 minute, is do you have anything to say you want to explain in terms of your backstopping the 1%?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I mean, generally, you know, when we're talking about that second or third point that you brought up, you know, right now, all we do is lending, right? That's the exclusive authority that we have. You know, if we did have more flexibility and made this sort of a true credit facility where the interest that's coming back stayed within the credit facility, you know, I think we then would have just broader flexibility to decide, well, instead of investing directly in this project, maybe we'll help buy the loan interest down, and that is just a cleaner way to proceed. Maybe we would decide that we want to provide a smaller grant to the project and also invest in terms of a loan alongside of it. Maybe we just want to do the grant. There's more and more interest in having equity participants as well, having a small equity piece that can help a lot with the cash flow of these developers because they don't have to pay you back on a regular basis. They pay you back when there's a liquidity event. So that could be a possibility as well. So I think it just broadly gives a lot more flexibility for us to find ways to maybe invest in projects in a different way and also to take on a little bit more risk, you know, because right now we have to be very risk adverse and that limits the kind of projects we can invest in. But if we were to make a grant, you know, we know that we're paying, we know that that money's not coming back to us. It's a different calculation. If we invest in a project and have this loan loss reserve maybe with this money, that gives us a little bit more flexibility. So just, you know, at the end of the day, it gives us different ways to potentially move projects forward and allows the risk profile to expand just a little bit than it exists now.
Any
And
further questions?
yeah,
Yes.
don't we have
Please.
other entities in the state that do that right now?
Yeah, so you know, they're potentially, yeah, I don't think on the equity side, they're,
But they grant.
yeah,
funds.
exactly. the grant
Yeah.
funds, yeah. And when we are making these investments, it is usually, I mean, we have that local investment advisory committee that has sort of their ear to different investments that are being made in housing investments, particularly the HFA. We often try to work also with the Department of Housing to get a sense of what are their priority projects that might exist and whether any of them show up in our RFP responses. And we do try to leverage our money so that we're not, you know, that one entity is making the right kind of loan to that particular investment or the right kind of equity or the right kind of grant. So we do try to coordinate with the other funders in that way. It's something that we look at.
Yes.
Did I miss the discussion about section 4 about credit for infrastructure investments at manufactured housing communities?
I think this is something we have to look at and probably ask counsel about. It looks like the existing law only mentions manufactured housing communities,
Yeah,
not housing generally,
right.
but yet you act on housing generally.
Yeah, we have, I mean, there are at least 3 investments that we've made into manufactured housing communities. They generally focus on taking out some, you know, they're developments that have gone cooperative, so it's now resident owned. And the costs of certain of their infrastructure improvements, maybe they already have a loan on the books and it's just a really high interest rate. And this comes in and provides them some relief, or they have infrastructure investments they need to make that they can't finance. And then that's another opportunity for us to come in through an intermediary and make those investments. So I think there's at least 3 investments that we've made that have involved, and one pretty significant one in Brattleboro as well, that's in the millions of dollars.
Well, Mike, I know you have to go. Thank you very much
Yeah,
for
thank
taking
you
the time to
all the
come.
committees.
Great, thank you. And council, can you return to the table? Oh, Michael has a hard stop. Wait, hold on, don't sit down. Yeah.
Michael's on.
Oh, Michael's on Zoom. Good, all right. I apologize to the committee. This is just a little disjointed. As I said, this program has 5 elements to it. And I think what we should do, Michael, you have until 2:30?
That's correct.
Okay. I think maybe it would be useful if very quickly you could walk through the section that Michael is going to testify to.
For the special assessments?
Yes.
Yep, happy to do that. So just again, John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. This is going to be a relatively simple section, special assessments bond, but just some context. In existing law, we have the ability for municipalities to impose special assessments, which are taxes levied on properties benefiting from a particular public improvement. It can be levied on the basis of a majority vote of the electorate, or if the property owners themselves that would be subject to the special assessment, meaning that they are the ones receiving the benefit of the public improvements that are funded through the special assessment. If they consent, then that special assessment can be imposed as well. So nothing about the section that you see here is touching the special assessment process itself. That continues to exist. We have this in existing law that you can impose special assessments for the purpose of public improvements. What this is adding a financing tool that could take advantage potentially of those special assessments. So section 3 is your special assessments bond. And what this is doing is creating a revenue. So subsection A is creating the process for actually issuing these revenue bonds. Just to back up a little bit, you'll know that for general obligation bonds, which are those that are supported by the taxing power of the municipality, and a holder of a bond that is a general obligation bond could compel a tax levy to support payments under that bond. We're talking about something different here. A revenue bond is backed exclusively by the revenues behind that bond. So what we see here is A is the authorization on approval of the legislative body of the municipality, subject to subsection C, which I'll talk about in a second. A municipality may issue revenue bonds for the purpose of financing a public improvement for the benefit of the limited area of the municipality to be served by the improvement. It's using the same language that's used in the special assessment section. This is just authorizing the municipality to issue those revenue bonds. And I do just want to focus on approval of the legislative body. You're going to be accustomed to saying vote, right? You're accustomed to saying a vote for the general obligation bonds, because you still have the existing process for the special assessment being imposed in the first place, requiring either that vote or consent of the affected property owners. We don't duplicate anything here. This is just going to be a bond backed by those revenues and limited to those revenues. It's not going to be something general taxing power could be felt. So revenue bond, the final line of this first subsection A revenue bond issued under this section is issued for an essential and governmental purpose. Michael might speak to this, but basically I think this is getting it. You can get certain tax advantages if bonds are issued for essential and governmental purposes. So subsection A is the authorization and the process by which that is done by a municipality. Subsection B is spelling out what a revenue bond really is and what the particular revenues are. So under subsection B, a revenue bond issued pursuant to this section shall be payable solely and exclusively from the special assessments levied on the properties to be served by that improvement, and they shall not constitute general indebtedness of the municipality. No holder of a bond issued under this section shall have the right to compel any exercise of the taxing power of the municipality to pay on the bonds. Really drawing out the distinction between the revenue bond and the general obligation bond. This is truly just backed by the special assessments themselves. There's no special assessment. There's not going to be something to pay on the bond, and no taxing power that could be compelled to pay on it. Subsection C is something quite different, and I think that Michael Gahn will be in the best position to speak to this, but you can think of these as sale restrictions that I think are related to the marketability of revenue bonds issued under this section. So the restriction that you see here is that the municipality may issue a revenue bond pursuant to this section only if one or more of the following conditions are met. The Vermont Bond Bank has provided a commitment letter for the issuance. Commitment letter, I'm sure you'll speak to this, but it's just a letter, it's an agreement laying out the terms for which financing would be extended. Subdivision 2, a major credit rating agency rates the issuance at a minimum credit rating of B. So this is one of the various credit ratings you can receive from those credit rating agencies. Or 3, a private bank has provided a commitment letter for the issuance and a certification that the private bank is a qualified institutional buyer or QUIB, because that term is used under the Securities Act, Rule 144A. You'll hear this referenced as a big boy letter, which is the term that's used in that space. But you can think of each of these conditions as saying, we either have a minimum credit rating for the issuance, or we know that the purchaser of the bond is sufficiently sophisticated, which is what qualified institutional buyer means. It's basically an exemption from standard Securities Act procedures for sufficiently sophisticated investors. We know that the purchaser of the bond is sufficiently sophisticated to understand that they're purchasing a revenue bond. This is meant to enhance, I think, some of the marketability, but I think that Michael will speak to this. That's the whole of the section. A is authorization, B is spelling out that it's a revenue bond, and C is setting out sales restrictions. The one thing I will say, if we come, I'm sure that we'll be coming back to this, we might have to think at some point about the timing, because subsection C is you can only issue it if these conditions are met, and they contemplate that you'd be pretty far down the road for that to happen, but there might be ways to do that. So that is your special assessment bonds.
Michael, you want to identify yourself in the record? I just want to add to the record that I know this man can do no wrong because, like me, he's from Cincinnati. Identify yourself for the record and take it away.
Thank you very much. Michael Gahn, I'm the executive director of the Vermont Bond Bank. And just to start out my comments here, I would just applaud both committees for the diversity of approaches to this very challenging problem. It's clear we need a quiver. And so in that spirit, this provision is in the spirit of seeing what works with different tools in the toolbox. And as most folks know, there's quite a bit of discussion about this last session. Infrastructure is oftentimes a barrier to housing development, and this is another tool to help facilitate that infrastructure development, expansion, et cetera. So special assessment revenue bonds, the idea here is that the users of the infrastructure pay for the infrastructure. Quite simply, that's what is accomplished by this. And because of that, it's saying, well, because the users of the infrastructure are the ones that pay for it, we don't need to, have all residents within a community sort of bear that obligation of this infrastructure and the debt associated with it. So that's what it's sort of a more narrow provision, a more narrow debt structure to facilitate infrastructure development. I shared some materials that I'm not necessarily going to walk through in detail, but what we're proposing here is extremely common public finance tool in 39 states, potentially more, but 39 states have issued either not at the state level, but subdivisions of the states have issued debt associated or in this form over the last 5 years in the total amount of 17 billion. That's likely a little bit of an undercount because it doesn't take into account private bank loans and things of that nature. These are just public bond issuances. There's also a piece that I shared from Nuveen, who's a major institutional investor, describing this category of debt, which is called land-based finance, essentially. And what you'll see in there is that it's a very useful tool. It reiterates the concept that the users of the infrastructure pay for it, but it does describe the fact that, in newer districts where you don't have a lot of vertical development, this can be of higher risk than, say, your typical municipal debt. And that's the reason we worked or we suggested these 3 guardrails so that we don't have a lot of speculative debt in this vein sort of floating around the state. We think it's a good tool, but it's a good tool when used with discretion and narrowness. And so I think the piece is helpful in describing the trade-offs of this particular structure. It also spends quite a bit of time talking about how this is very closely tied to housing development in places like California, Florida, Colorado, and Texas. It is the way that infrastructure development to support housing is facilitated. And so obviously we're strongly in support with this, with these strong guardrails so that we don't have a lot of speculative grade a debt of this nature floating around the state, and we preserve our good reputation. We have some modest suggestions from this draft, which is just to make sure we also include credit unions, define private banks, make sure that's defined well, and then potentially open it up to other financial institutions that might be like other private institutional investors, but we'd want to work through details of that in the future with some additional guardrails and review. But generally, we like this language.
Revenue bond. We do. Okay. Questions, Mr. Bond? This is simply trying to put another financing device on the table that is used in other jurisdictions, and to have the approval, the governmental approval tailored to who's paying, who's responsible. Yes.
So it seems like you're putting together a package of things that might help in rural, especially because of the difficulties. And I'm just trying to understand, maybe Mr. Gogan, how this additional financing would apply to some of these small rural towns. And maybe the project or the assessment area is particularly big, and how that would mesh both in terms of the municipality being able to avail itself of that possibility, as well as the practical reality of some of these smaller projects and the type of developer that would be thinking about it.
Mike, would you want to comment?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's actually, that was the genesis of this idea, is that very situation you're describing. We are the financial administrator of the state's SRF program and are deeply involved with the village wastewater systems that have been proposed in a number of communities that would help with additional density and housing development. And we observed several circumstances when a very small amount of debt was going to help leverage a very large amount of grant dollars for that community and help facilitate quite a bit of new housing. And because the entire community was being asked to weigh in on this very narrow project for a small portion of the town, in some instances, the projects couldn't move forward. And so that actually informed a lot of the thinking around this tool. And for those very small communities, we would expect and hope that they're working with the bond bank and the SRF program, or through our new housing infrastructure loan program that the General Assembly funded last session, where we can be very hands-on with a lot of technical assistance on how to get through this process, and they can be assured that they have a trustworthy partner on the other side of this debt instrument looking out for them. So yeah, the whole idea behind this, really the genesis, was rural communities.
Yeah, and it would seem to be that this is a helpful proposal, but it'll have to mesh with other things in order to get especially an affordable housing project in a small little town going. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it's agnostic to it doesn't speak to affordability, it speaks to the infrastructure side of it. But I can give you a real life example. Through our housing loan program, we've been having preliminary discussions, and there is a project that's proposed by Cathedral Square Senior Living that has will support a lot of density, but I think it's a $5 million infrastructure cost for 30 units, because they can't do it with they can't do it through decentralized system. So essentially, like if that's providing new land value along that new infrastructure, that's something that we can capture through the special assessment because you're going to have increased land values where you have that ability to have density. And so that's a great example of how it can tie to an affordable project, which oftentimes have more density anyway. So that's just one for instance. They aren't, there isn't a requirement there, but there's definitely a nexus in terms of the policy intervention.
Yes, you have one more question here before you leave us.
Thank you, Michael. Can you help me contextualize a triple B credit rating or bond rating and municipalities of under 5,000? Does that feel like a bar that's clearable?
Yeah, I would expect that for a community under 5,000, really, and it would honestly be my hope that they're working with the bond bank so we can, we can be there to do really good technical assistance focused loan underwriting. But we didn't want to preclude other options if that community have some special sophistication. The town of Stowe, for example, even though they don't go to the public markets, they carry a AA3 public rating. So for instances like that, we don't want to preclude any options. However, for a small town, we would hope they work with us. A triple B minus is the lowest what's called investment grade credit rating. So that's that's notable. Once you go below that level or you don't have a rating, you're into the speculative debt category, and that's where you really want these guardrails around making sure that it's only qualified institutional buyers or accredited investors that are buying the debt. So we are actually requesting that it be one notch higher than a triple B minus again, so that we maintain. Vermont has a very good debt reputation in the wider municipal market, and we want to preserve that while also allowing what we think is a very important tool for housing development.
Thanks.
I just want to add that part of the impetus here came from, frankly, my own experience with the bond bank being involved in a very small project to rehabilitate an old dam in my town of Calais, where part of the money came from an assessment, from a bond. And the bond bank is just incredibly great to work with because they are used to working with very small amounts of money relatively in small towns. And I think that's really a terrific advantage. And it goes to the question you were raising, that they're just set up for this.
Thank you.
Michael, are there other questions? Yes.
I have a quick question. So the way I read this, the bond would just need to be approved by the legislative body of the municipality and not by all voters.
Correct.
That's right. You'd have to, tying back to the original special assessment statute, you would have to have approval of, those property owners that are subject to the assessment. So yeah, so there's already consent there, and then you have consent at the board governing body level to, secure those assessments in a debt structure. What we really want to avoid, and what you'll see in the literature I shared, was that other states approach this issue through additional special districts. In other words, additional units of government. We want to consolidate the number of units of government here. So that's an important point to us. And we share, this is the way Oregon approaches the problem as well. We're really interested in eliminating any new special districts and keeping things with our existing units of government. So that's just to give you a little background on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Mr. Gahn before he takes off? Michael, thank you so much for being with us. And I gather you do have a few suggestions for small changes, and I gather that you're in touch with council.
I'll reach out.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that we loop back to do that.
Great, thank you. They're very technical, and for the joint committee, I would have loved to be there in person with school pickups and all. It's a little tricky on Friday, but thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. So shall we continue the walkthrough?
Can I respond to two things
Please.
to Representative Cooper's question? I don't think your question was premised on a misunderstanding, but I did just want to confirm that the options are options. You only need one of the three. You don't have to have a triple B rating.
Right.
I just want to make sure that was clear. The other thing I was going to say for subsection C, which is dealing with the marketability, the commitment letters, or the credit ratings, I just wanted to note that in the special assessments chapter, there's a subchapter related to clean energy assessment district, which is a more technical thing. And one of the approaches that they take there for securing agreements from the property owners is meeting underwriting standards published by DFR. So just to note that you can take different approaches to how you want to secure this and ensure that sufficient standards are kept up. This is one way of doing it, but just note that the statutes contain other ways of thinking about kind of minimum financial guarantees.
What we have now, we have two sections remaining. We do have one witness remaining, and that I think is on a very simple aspect of the bill, which is the VHIF. Right. So maybe we should take that, let the witness testify, and then go back to the accelerator. Does that make sense?
That's how you would like to proceed, yes, sir?
All right.
So I'm gonna share my screen again and get us to that section that we're gonna move to, which is on page 14. So apologies for this. And I'll take a moment just to apologize for, the kind of transitions we've been going through. We should have probably started this out by just identifying that all of these different subject areas that we're talking about, they are somewhat exclusive of each other. And they could be used together for these housing projects that could move forward if all of this were to pass and become law. But as we discussed in the beginning, you have this pilot program that has specific parameters about where they can be located, affordability, et cetera. Entirely separate from that, we have the treasurer's credit facilities that we've discussed and increasing the percentage that they could invest with that credit facility, and then adding on the ability for them to use those funds, including the interest that they would now keep in the special fund, using that for bulk purchasing. Separate from that, we have what we just walked through, which was the revenue bonds for special assessments. Separate from that, we're going to talk about this change here in section 7 on page 14, which is changes to the Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program. I'm going to start just with the assumption that you all are relatively familiar with what this is. There's been multiple changes of the program throughout the past few years, addressing expanding eligibility for people who are served through the program, et cetera. But essentially, this is through Department of Housing and Community Development, and the purpose is for rehabilitation of housing program, rehabilitation of housing throughout the state. And this is making a change in sub A regarding the administration of the program under subdivision 2. The department shall develop statewide standards for the program, including factors that partner organizations use to evaluate applications and award grants. So as you all may recall, DHCD actually provides funds to other entities to then loan out or grant out to individuals to use to rehabilitate housing. My understanding of how that works on the ground is they don't give all the money up front. The landlord or the person doing the development has to put in a certain percentage of their own money. And then they receive funding throughout the life cycle of the rehabilitation from VHIP. What this language would do is it says the department may authorize partnership organizations to advance funding at the beginning of a project as part of an award. There's nothing in the statute that prohibits DHCD from doing this now. In discussing with the department, it's something that they feel that they would need direct authorization to do so. So that's what this language is intended to do. As straightforward as it's written on the page, they can authorize those partner organizations that they work through to distribute the money, to give the money to the individual who's doing the rehabilitation up front, as opposed to providing it more on a reimbursement basis.
Yeah, being here again, just making things easier for small developers that don't have as much access to cash. And maybe what we should do is hear from DHCD and then take questions. Would that be okay?
I just have a very quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
When it says, financing, it doesn't say, obviously, we're talking about the grants and it could also be the loan. So it could be like an upfront loan that gets paid back rather than being a reimbursement grant.
Right.
Or
Yeah,
a
they do-
reimbursement loan that
They
we
do
used to
both.
do.
So they do both grants and loans. And depending on whether it's a grant or depending on whether it's a 5-year or a 10-year loan will depend on who the unit then has to be rented to, how long the affordability has to exist, et cetera.
Right, we're not seeing that language here because that's not what we're
It
changing.
would just
Right.
apply to all of it. You know, you could do, if it's a grant, you could do it up front. If it's a loan. It would just give the department pretty broad authority to allow them to advance funding. They would then be able to dictate what that looks like. Maybe they only advance it if it's a grant. Maybe they're only gonna advance half of it if it's a 5-year loan. Those would be questions for them about how they would go about implementing it.
Josh, you want to come and testify on this issue of, not PHCD, what am I saying? PHCD here?
No.
They're not. Okay, well then, I'm sorry,
It's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm used to. Yeah, right. My apologies to the committee for doing this out of order. I thought we had a witness, but we don't. Again, this was just we don't have testimony, but this is very simply designed to make it one more way of potentially making it easy for a small developer. Why don't we now go to the housing accelerator?
Okay. So I'm gonna back up. Been happy to take any questions if others have it on the view that change there. Backing up to page 12, section 6. So this is another pilot program, so entirely separate from the rural program that we discussed earlier. This would be an offsite construction accelerator pilot with, should say, through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development in collaboration with the Department of Buildings and General Services, shall develop a pilot demonstration project and study that explores the possibilities of reducing housing development costs through modular construction. My understanding is this is a proposal from the administration, so you all may want to hear from the department or from the agency directly about their, thoughts behind this or how they intend to actually implement. But as far as the language goes, the pilot would consider the following elements: bulk purchasing for a single development or aggregation of multiple developments, so it doesn't have to be a singular. Streamlining regulatory processes by creating pre-approved modular designs. Moving to the top of page 13. Creating a loan loss reserve for construction loans, offsite construction, including panelized or volumetric modular construction. Establishing a statewide procurement consortium for bulk orders, aligning state local permitting, and the creation and adoption of offsite building codes. So how are they going to go about doing all of that? You get into subsection C and D. The agency can work with the Office of State Treasurer to identify the feasibility of the state providing a guarantee or other device to facilitate bulk purchasing of offsite construction of homes. So if all of this were to go into statute as a package, that could be the work that you've done in the Treasurer's credit facility. You've added sections in there that allow them to use those funds for this purpose. Could be something different. The pilot shall occur in a municipality willing to participate in the regulatory reforms necessary to implement the process and accept the constructed homes. There's not a lot of detail on what that looks like, how municipalities would, apply or potentially be chosen. So that may be a conversation or questions that you want to direct to the agency or the department. But they would work with a municipality, could be one, could be multiple. All under the kind of umbrella here of looking at offsite construction and bulk purchasing to utilize those in developing housing in that municipality or municipalities that are chosen. Municipal planning grants are made available to a participating municipality to assist in enacting necessarily regulatory reforms. And then we have reports here in subsection F, Article 415/2028, agency shall submit a written report to House Committee on General and Housing, Senate Committee on Economic Development for recommendations and legislative action based on the success of the pilot. The last thing I'll comment is the administration did ask for a significant amount of funds to implement this pilot, so that may be something that they come back and they want to discuss with them. We can have them testify.
You've worked really hard on this part. Do you want to comment about this?
Yep, I can comment a little bit. The sum of money in the administrative version of the bill was a placeholder number. We've taken it out because we've had conversations with the treasurer about funding it differently rather than out of budget. There is additional language that during markup will likely be put in here to better articulate these items 1 through 7 criteria to look at. A great deal of the work that represents has already been done, but it's been done in different agencies, different offices and organizations. So everything from 802 Homes, the agency itself, Let's Build the Homes, and so on. And what we're finding is they have a lot of parallel material that they come up with independently. So we'll be meeting and sitting down with them. One thing that this does do is enable DCH, or the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, to herd these different ideas together and synthesize them in a clear manner. They're the ones that know how to make this happen. So they're really are the subject matter experts. I want to give them the latitude to make adjustments that will make the program work and make it work relatively soon. I think this is one more, by way of background, what we're dealing with here, we're not dealing with manufactured homes that are like what you think of as single wides and double wides. That's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with homes that are built in a factory, such as Huntington Homes, for example. They're built in a factory and there are, many models, and they're taken out in trucks in big and then put together on site. We had testimony, the General and Housing had testimony which revealed that though these homes have substantial advantages in that they can be constructed quickly, they can be constructed indoors in the winter, and in addition, with a workforce that is specially trained and doesn't have to work outdoors and spend a lifetime becoming old sooner. And that those are terrific advantages. The reality is that those houses are in the same price range as stick-built homes. That is, they're not a lot cheaper than a stick-built home. So the question has come up, well, how do we make them cheaper? And the answer is bulk ordering. It's one thing if, in other words, if you go to an organization, I'm just going to use the name Huntington Homes, but it could be any one of a number of manufacturers. Want us to be able to say to them, build us 40 of these homes, this model. And then it's going to be cheaper. And the question is, if you ask how much cheaper, the answer is, of course, I don't know. We're not there yet. But it's definitely going to be cheaper. In order to do that, they need two things. They need a certain number of orders. They're not going to do it for 2 orders or 3 orders, or the savings won't be that great. They need a significant number of orders. In order to do that, one possibility is, yes, if you have one developer, Tom lives in Chester, and Chester has a project that could be, 100 units. The developer of that project could decide to order 40 units of a certain type. But that's great if they do. Then it doesn't need a lot of aggregation.
But on the other hand, a lot of what we're imagining is, again, these units, 5 units here, 5 units there, 10 units here. We want one agency aggregating these, working with the developers, seeing if we can agree on a common module, and then go to the Huntington Homes or whatever it is and say, here it is. So that's one element of this, is aggregating it. And the second is working with the treasurer's office. The treasurer has been really great in thinking with us and saying, these 5 developers stand behind their order. They will pay for these units, each one of them. Obviously, they have to have their financing lined up, et cetera. But we want you to stand behind them one way or another. Whether it's purchasing a credit facility or, without getting now into exactly how it's done, that some way or another, the state doesn't have to pay for the units, but the state stands behind in order to facilitate the purchase. This is a classic example of leveraging, using state funds to leverage private sector activity. So that is the theory behind this.
Michael has a question.
Yes, Mike.
I was just curious, is it possible that one of the drivers for the increased pricing in housing is regulations that we have put on developers? And I mean, obviously, we talk about Act 250 and all that, but just in general, regulations for, efficiencies, and I don't know because I'm not a developer, but I am curious, is that something that's driving our prices up?
It's one of the factors.
And have we gone down that road of possibly reducing those factors?
I know that there are any number of efforts in the legislature and there are any number of proposals to try to reduce the transactional cost of permitting. We have a bill that is in the Senate, Senator Clarkson introduced, that I introduced, to make the appeals process much quicker. Let's Build Homes has proposed one approach. The administration has ideas as well. These are very interesting. Some of the most interesting ideas are what is called by right housing. That is housing which will not require any discretionary permit. It is simply the developer can walk into a town and just ask for a building permit. In order to do that, you have to build into the planning apparatus of the town all the criteria you need, and we have to integrate it with state permits. State permits are a substantial part of the problem. It's not just local permits. It's not just Act 250. It's all the permits together. But that's about all I can say right now in answer to that question. What this does, it doesn't address the permitting issue directly, but I think that it could. Because it could get to the point of where it meshes with the 802 Homes proposal, where you have project designs that are pre-approved. Tom, and then we have other questions. Tom, and then other questions.
Okay, just the quick answer is yes, to your question. The advantage of small and simple projects, hopefully, is to make the financing stack simpler, because every additional player that's doing grants or is doing low financing, they all have their own criteria for what has to happen. From experience, I can tell you that federal funds kick in a lot of criteria and expectations that get very expensive very fast. And it is true that when government funding gets into a building project, the price does go up because of the number of additional things that we are asking for. This bill does not directly deal with those. There are some advantages to offsite construction that will help alleviate a little bit of that. But it is, in addition to zoning, it is also it's energy code. It's everything from the point for all of us, but it's little bits and pieces that get added as
additional organizations get involved.
It's one issue. I think the biggest driver is it's materials and labor. Yes, you have a question and give us.
I just thought that, I thought that the bill did on page 13 talk a lot about working with municipalities that are willing to work on their regulatory process. That's part of the deal, is that you get to be part of this pilot program because you're willing to at the start, before you know, anything happens, before there's a single bit of dirt, you know, being dug up, you have already basically heard all of the input, right, from people who might have objections to one aspect or another. And so the point of this is really a great testing ground for broader, in my opinion, broader discussions that we're trying to have statewide at the local level.
Other questions? We're within 5 minutes of the end of our hearing today. God forbid we should end early, but. Okay, all right.
I want to just do a very quick point. You have two other sections in here. One is related to positions. It creates two positions within the Department of Housing and Community Development, and then you have the effective date, which is, I believe, just July.
Thank you. Samantha, do you want to come up? You have 6 minutes.
That's it. Actually, we could maybe do it. No.
My thought says you.
Oh, that's good. You have 8 minutes.
Great. For the record, my name is Samantha Sheehan, the Municipal Policy and Advocacy Specialist for the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And I do hope this will be quick. We support the bill, encourage you to take it up and to pass it. With a few tweaks maybe, but I guess where I'd like to, I'm gonna primarily speak to sections 1 through 3 today. And I first wanna underline something that you heard from Legislative Council, which is in both cases, so the opportunity here for a tax stabilization for the purpose of construction and the opportunity for the special assessment revenue bond. These are really existing municipal finance authorities now. What you would be doing through the language proposed here would be expanding and making more flexible the use of those existing authorities that Vermont communities already utilize for a variety of endeavors. As well as you heard from Michael from the Vermont Bond Bank, these are really consistent with best practices and really successful programs from around the country. So it's talking about the proposal for a tax stabilization agreement for housing. This is something VLCT has advocated for a long time, but specifically we have advocated that the state put some skin in the game with these types of agreements. Because now a municipality can vote, or a municipality can choose to enter into a tax stabilization agreement for its own municipal property tax rate. It can also choose to provide that stabilization for the state education property tax rate by a vote of the whole town. This has been done, it's pretty rare, and it's usually for like a very large commercial purpose. So like a big employer, like a big building with multiple uses that usually is gonna attach a lot of other different types of revenues, not specifically for housing of 5 units or 10 units. And even then, when the municipality does vote, all the voting residents of the city of Montpelier voted for this type of tax stabilization agreement, which has happened here in Montpelier. what it would mean is that all the other property taxpayers would still be owing the state their money from the new tax growth on that property that has been stabilized. So what we're asking for is, as John Gray laid out, there are sort of two places to put this in the law. We're asking for the place that actually would stabilize the tax rate for the state for that period of the 7 years.
My impression was that's what the draft does.
Yes,
You
I think
support what the draft
we
does,
support what the draft does.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and if you were to undo that,
Then you wouldn't. support
it wouldn't be a new thing,
Yes,
basically.
right.
Yeah, it wouldn't be like a new tool for municipalities to use. Because there's a way to do it now and it's pretty convoluted and everybody else has to pick up the slack. There was something else I want to say. Oh, super minor, but in the same section. In subsection C3, in speaking to the affordability requirement. This really performed like another thing municipalities already have the ability to do, which is an inclusionary zoning ordinance. Where you're requiring for a period of time, a percentage of the units being made affordable. And that should be ordinance, not bylaw. That's just not something like bylaw does. It's something that municipal ordinance does. And then. I don't know, Mr. Chair, you can direct me or I can take questions. There are, I think, a lot of ways where there are many reasons why we support, especially the earlier sections of the bill for the special assessment district for revenue bonds. There are many ways they could be used and leveraged along with other existing state programs, or for certain particular types of infrastructure that have a customer. So water and sewer and electric, where there's a few dozen municipal electric utilities. So it's a very useful tool when you're not just creating housing, but you're creating new customers. So an apartment building might be one property and one value on the grand list, but it may be 20 or 100 or 150 new utility customers. And so in these cases, this type of special assessment revenue bonds can be very productive and a really healthy way to socialize the cost of the infrastructure. And we support it. We support expanded authorities for municipalities to use the tools flexibly. I guess maybe the last sort of high level point I'll make is that what's really cool about this package of policies in this bill is that it directs both state and municipal types of public investment specifically into rural towns, which has not been happening for the purpose of housing. We know from prior years' studies and VHFA needs assessments that we have some really good productive tools that VLCT supports continued appropriation for, like the downtown tax credits, VHIP, brownfield redevelopment and revitalization money, many programs created and spent with ARPA dollars. Not a lot of that money has gotten into sub 5,000, sub 2,500 population communities. And so what's cool about these, and we hope you preserve them sort of the way they're drafted now in sections 1, 2, and 3, is that you're putting the lever in the small town government to pull, to put public investment in for the period of time that it's needed to build the infrastructure and housing that the community wants.
You know what, I know I know you're going to be
Great place
testifying.
to end.
You're gonna be testifying before our committee again, and you probably will be testifying before Senate Congress. But one question, and then I think we have to end. What's your question?
And I just, thank you for your comments. A lot of this bill came from last year when we recognized very quickly that CHIP wouldn't be enough specifically for our small rural towns. I know I personally can be a bit of a dog with a bone when it comes to that, and I recognize that. And I'm about to put you on the spot. So maybe you'll come back and you can give me an exact answer. Looking at the location requirement, with the population of fewer than 5,000 persons, Do you know how many municipalities?
It's most of the state.
Okay, that's what I figured.
Yeah, 73% of municipalities have a population of 2,500 or less.
Beautiful, thank you. Perfect.
With that, I want to thank the members for all your questions and your attention. It's a pleasure to have the two committees together. And I want to thank in advance the Commerce Committee for being willing to work with us on this in a relatively short timeframe. I think it needs a little work, but so things always need a little work. Thank you. We are adjourned. Yep.